John Adams as president. John Adams became the second president of the United States in the election of 1796. His opponent, Thomas Jefferson, became vice president because he received the second most electoral votes. When the United States first started electing presidents, this was their method of electing vice president. Whoever came in first place with electoral votes became the president. Whoever came in second place became the vice president. Usually, these people were going to have two different ideas, two different political parties as political parties started to develop. So this didn't work out very well, and they did end up changing it to where you picked your vice president to run with you, and you were voting for a president and vice president combo, no matter which one you were voting for. You couldn't vote for one president that was in one party and one vice president that was in another. They went together. So if you're voting for a certain president, you were getting the vice president that was running with him. But originally, this is how it worked. So when John Adams became president, he primarily tried to continue the policies of George Washington. George Washington was the first president. John Adams was your second. So John Adams was looking for ways to carry on George Washington's plans. He also heeded George Washington's advice in his farewell address about disentanglement in foreign affairs. So Washington urged the United States to disentangle itself from foreign affairs, to not have any standing alliances with foreign countries, because you didn't want to get stuck because of some treaty being an ally to a country whose ideas you didn't really believe in, but you were tied to them in this treaty. So George Washington urged the future president, in this case John Adams, to try to disentangle itself from foreign affairs, to get out of any permanent treaties, and to just kind of stay clear of foreign problems, any foreign conflicts. So, in light of that, Adams was immediately confronted by the French. And the French were angry about the Jay Treaty and about the broken Treaty of Alliance of 1788. So let's talk about those. The Treaty of Alliance of 1788 was signed during the Revolutionary War, when or was a continuation of what happened during the Revolutionary War, where the French sided with the Americans. They fought. They fought on the same side against the British to accomplish the Americans becoming free of Britain. So the Americans had continued this alliance with France. But then, during the French Revolution, the Americans were trying to remain neutral. So if the Americans were remaining neutral, they weren't going to be siding with either the British or the French. Well, the Treaty of Alliance said the Americans were supposed to side with the French. But the Americans weren't doing that, so they considered the Treaty of Alliance to be broken. Then you have the Jay Treaty. The British weren't upholding a lot of the terms of the Revolution ending. They were still seizing American ships and sailors and goods. They were still keeping their forts in the Northwest. They were still doing a lot of stuff that they weren't supposed to do anymore. So the Americans and the British signed the Jay Treaty, which said that they were going to have friendlier relations. The British said, okay, we're not going to, seize your ships anymore. We'll get our troops out for real this time. And the French didn't like this, because now it looked like they had broken the Treaty of Alliance and weren't siding with France, and now they were signing a treaty with the British saying that they were going to get along with them. Now, they didn't say they were going to fight alongside the British, but they did agree to get along with them, and they weren't following the Treaty of Alliance. So the French were upset by this. The Americans were just trying to stay out of foreign affairs, as they were advised to by George Washington. They had just gotten out of a revolution. They didn't want to be involved in a war again. So after the French began destroying American ships, Adams sent American diplomats to meet with the French ambassador Talleyrand, who demanded tribute and then snubbed the Americans. So the French began destroying American ships. The Americans said, okay, we're not going to fight back. We want to solve this peacefully. So Adams sent diplomats to speak to the French ambassador. The French ambassador demanded an outrageous amount of money to even meet with them, and then he ended up snubbing them. So the Americans were really mad about this. When the diplomats came back home and they heard about all this happening, the Americans were so upset that the French treated them that way, and so they were mad. They were ready for war. They didn't care about staying neutral anymore. A lot of the Americans just wanted to fight France. But Adams didn't want to do that. He knew that right now, America was still developing, still becoming strong. He didn't want to get the United States into a war right now. So there did follow an undeclared naval war between 1798 and 1800. During this time, the American military grew rapidly, warships were built, and the Department of the Navy was established. So they didn't declare war on France. What they did do was send ships out there, and if these warships could find a French ship, they would attack that ship. Now, they didn't go into all-out war, but there was a somewhat naval war going on between France and the United States at this time. Finally, at the Convention of 1800, so after about 2 years of this undeclared naval war going on, the Treaty of Alliance of 1778 was torn up, and it was agreed in the new Treaty of Mortefontaine that both sides would waive damages done to their ships by the other, among a host of other clauses, including each country giving the other most favored nation trade status. So at the Convention of 1800, the French were pretty much ready to get along with the United States again. They were fine with tearing up this Treaty of Alliance and saying, okay, fine, you don't have to be our ally anymore and fight if someone attacks us, but we do want to get along, because if the United States was on Britain's side and against France, Britain might actually defeat the French, and the French didn't want that. But if America was neutral, they could still send food to the French, and the French really needed that right now to feed all these troops that they had fighting the British. So both sides had damaged or destroyed the other country's ships, so they waived damages to each other's ships. And then they agreed to a host of other clauses, including each of the countries naming the other most favored nation as far as trade status goes, which meant that they would give each other low tariffs and a high quota for what they could bring in, what they could import and export. So instead of keeping things limited or giving them a high tariff, they were giving them a better deal on any kind of goods traded between France and the United States. So John Adams was George Washington's replacement. He was the second president of the United States. And he tried really hard to keep out of foreign affairs and to keep the United States neutral as the French and British were fighting. Unfortunately, he was immediately confronted by the French. They were upset about the Jay Treaty between the United States and the French, between the United States and Britain, and they were unhappy about the Treaty of Alliance of 1778 being broken, where the United States was supposed to be backing up France if it was attacked, and instead the United States had been trying to be neutral during the French Revolution. The French began destroying American ships. The Americans sent diplomats. When the diplomats were snubbed, the Americans started destroying French ships too. Eventually, they agreed to the Treaty of Mortefontaine. They destroyed the Treaty of Alliance, so now the United States was no longer tied into any permanent alliance with a foreign power, which is what George Washington advised, and John Adams was very, very happy about this. He felt like this was a huge success. He lost a lot of popularity because a lot of Americans wanted to go to war with France rather than settling peacefully, because they were very unhappy about being snubbed, first of all, and then as the French kept destroying ships, a lot of Americans wanted to go to war. But John Adams pushed for peace. John Adams got this treaty signed and got the Treaty of Alliance of 1778 destroyed, which disentangled them from foreign affairs, which was what George Washington had advised. So John Adams didn't end up winning the next election, primarily because he lost a lot of popularity with his decisions regarding relations with France. But John Adams was very proud of how he did disentangle the United States from foreign affairs.
To find out more about how to ace your test and get more practice for your test, click the study guide. Learn why Mometrix is the best and smartest decision you could make for your test prep choice. We have done all the work cutting through the fluff to give you what you need to perform well on your exam. Click the study guide to get started now. And thank you for watching and learning with us.